Thanks very much. Uh, Very warm welcome to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you have joined from. I welcome you to this 2021 edition of Connect KARO, and particularly to this session on the economic geography approach to planning. Just to set the context and give you a little background to why this work. In WRI-India, we started this when the government announced its ambitions of becoming a $5 trillion economy or a $10 trillion economy. A lot of people felt that this was, very, very ambitious. But we felt that unless you set ambitions which are rather high, you don't get anywhere. If you set an ambition which is delta, you'll probably still be sub-delta. But, these are the kinds of ambitions that need to be set. And at least we feel that these are the potential that India does have. But with these ambitions, the thought that came to our mind was most of this growth will be in cities. So cities not only have to accommodate this growth, they also have to enable this growth. And how is it that this growth can be done in a manner that is sustainable, in a manner that is just, and in a manner that requires our cities to be far superior in terms of the services they deliver, because they'll be doing it for a much larger population and the volumes will get much larger. So that was the background in which we started this whole work. And then we began to realize that the traditional approach to planning, which is what we call the master planning, is sort of being overtaken by more economic approaches to planning in other parts of the world. And that's why we felt that why not start looking at what we could do in India? What kind of a framework can there be in India for looking at an economic geography approach? The idea of regional was when you get into master planning within a city, a master plan is primarily a spatial plan. But what is the basis behind that spatial plan? Can there be an economic basis, a regional economic basis for that kind of master plan? So I think that was really the background on which we thought of doing some of this work. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has now set up a committee to really come up with potential frameworks for planning going forward. Amit is a member of that committee. So what we are hoping is that this work could also provide some inputs to that committee to come up for a nationwide or a national policy on planning for urban areas in future. And we feel that unless that kind of an approach is taken, getting to a $5 or $10 trillion economy needs our cities to be much more vibrant, much more accommodating and enabling of the kind of growth that is needed. So that really was the background. We've done some work which Madhav will present, and then he will moderate a discussion. I look forward to the discussion on this. We have a very eminent panel. I'm just going to introduce them briefly in a few minutes. But what I am looking forward to is your feedback, your suggestions, your thoughts, and the kind of discussion that will take place will really help us, refine our work further. So with that, we have on the panel, first, we have Dr. Sameer Sharma. Sameer has been a dear friend for many years. He was part of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. I think he should be joining us very shortly. He's currently the Director General and CEO of the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, which is located a little beyond Gurgaon. And he is a scholar, administrator. He belongs to the 1985 batch of the IAS, worked in the Andhra cadre, and he has had vast experience in public and corporate affairs. So Sameer was also the one who led the Smart Cities mission when it started from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. He's worked as the Municipal Commissioner of Hyderabad, won a lot of laurels while he was working in Hyderabad. He's in fact received certificates of appreciation from the Prime Minister of India for the JNNURM reforms in governance in Hyderabad, and also for making outstanding efforts for Hyderabad to become a slum-free city. So that is Sameer. He should be joining us fairly soon. Then we have Dr. Balaji Parthasarathy, who is a professor at the International Institute of Information Technology in Bangalore, the IIIT in Bangalore. He served as the Institute's first dean from January 2014 to February 2017. He also co-founded IIIT Bangalore Center for Information Technology and Public Policy. He's also the lead investigator for the Fair Work project in India. His interests are rooted in economic geography and economic sociology and explore relationships between technological change and innovation, economic globalization and social transformation. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of California in Berkeley, which is also where Madhav passed out from. So you have two colleagues from the same alma mater.
May I just jump in, Mr. Agrawal? My PhD was not in philosophy, it was in regional planning and economic geography. Just a small correction. Okay. So sorry about that.
Thanks. I'm sorry about that. I don't know where we got this from, but this is what we got as your bio from some source, I don't know. But regional planning and what did you say? PhD in regional planning?
Basically, I mean, I did it in economic geography and economic sociology.
Okay.
That's what I would like to say.
Great. Perfect. So perfect fit for this. Then we have Vidisha Ganguly, who is the chief economist at CII. She has been associated with CII from 2007 onwards. She holds a MA in economics from the Delhi School of Economics and a bachelor's degree in economics from the Presidency College. Really delighted to have you. I think this is the kind of work that will be very interesting for CII to pick up on. And that's, really happy that you've been able to join us for this one.
Thank you.
Then we have Amit Kapoor. Amit is an honorary chairman at the Institute of Competitiveness in India. He's president of the Indian Council of Competitiveness and editor-in-chief of Thinkers. He's the chair of the Social Progress Imperative and Shared Value Initiative India and sits on the board of competitiveness initiatives in Mexico, Netherlands, Italy, France, and the University of Vermont's SEMBA Advisory Board. In addition to being the advisor to Thinkers 50 and participant with the Global Solutions Network, he's an affiliate faculty for the macroeconomics domain in the competitiveness and value-based healthcare delivery courses of the Institute of Strategy and Competitiveness at the Harvard Business School, and is an instructor with the Harvard Business Publishing in the area of strategy, competitiveness, and business models. He has worked with the Niti Aayog on competitiveness, on the Ease of Living Index for Indian districts, and also the Innovation Index for the states in India. As I mentioned earlier, he's also part of that committee set up by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs on creating planning frameworks for urban areas in India. Then we have Rana Hassan. He's the Regional Economic Advisor at the South Asia Department of the ADB. He previously worked in the Economics Research Department of the ADB and the East-West Center in the US, where he focused on issues relating to inclusive growth, the analysis of poverty and inequality, and the impact of market-oriented economic reforms on labor market outcomes and industrial performance. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Maryland in the United States and completed his master's degree in economics from the Delhi School of Economics. Then we have Professor Amitabh Kundu. Professor Kundu really needs no introduction. He's a colossus in this whole domain. But right now we are privileged to have him in WRI-India as our senior fellow with the Sustainable Cities and Transport Program. He has been a distinguished fellow at the Research and Information System for Developing Countries. He was professor and dean of the School of Social Sciences at JNU, a member of the National Statistical Commission, and chaired the Post-Sachar Evaluation Committee, and that for estimating urban housing shortage. He was regional advisor on poverty at the UN ESCWA Beirut and consultant to Sri Lankan government on population census. Currently, he's chairing a committee to monitor the national survey being conducted for Swachh Bharat mission for the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation. He was a visiting professor at the University of Amsterdam, Sciences Po and Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, University of Kaiserslautern, and University of Würzburg. He was director at various institutes in India and is in the editorial board of many national and international journals. He has about 25 books and 200 research articles published in India and abroad to his credit, No wonder Professor Kundu really needs no introduction. Thanks for joining us today, Professor Kundu. Then we have Shri Abhijit Saman. He is the Deputy Director Technical as the NCR Planning Board. Previously, he was the Assistant Director Technical at the NCR Planning Board and was involved in coordinating and monitoring implementation of regional plan policies, reviewing physical and financial project progress of projects funded by the board, and also represented the board at various high-level meetings. Prior to this, he was the Senior Planner at Lee Associates South Asia Limited and Deputy General Manager at DMG Consulting. Abhijit has a master's degree in business administration and a master's degree in planning with specialization in transport planning. Finally, we come to the moderator for today's session, who will also make the background presentation for the panel. This is my colleague and dear friend, Madhav Pai. He is the Executive Director of the WRI-India Ross Center. This is really our urban program, the entire urban program. It's called the Ross Center for WRI. He spearheads a large urbanization policy, research and prototyping support program that informs key areas of India's urban growth story. For the last 2 decades, Madhav has led, designed and implemented urban programs and projects across continents in over a dozen countries. India's urbanization challenges are the key research focus of Madhav's exploration. He joined WRI in 2008. In fact, he started all of WRI's work way back in 2008. And I've had the privilege of knowing him from around that time when I had not yet joined WRI. But Madhav really got everything started. Whatever we are is really Madhav's efforts so far. He has pioneered several new and innovative methods to overcome barriers to implementation of environmentally and financially sustainable infrastructure. So that's the eminent panel that we have today. And I really look forward to the discussions as we go forward. With this, let me pass it on to you, Madhav. Over to you.
Thank you, OP. And I'm going to share my screen just so that, just give me a moment.
For 1 sec, let Madhav, before you go 1 sec, Samir has also joined us. So just wanted to tell everyone. Hi, Samir. I've taken the privilege of introducing you before you joined us. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, OP.
So thank you very much, OP, for introducing the panel and giving context for this work. I do want to acknowledge that this is the work I'm presenting is of our team, my colleagues Vandana, Vasudevan, Rajit Matthews. I've done a lot of this work and also with support from Tintu, Paramjit, and our geoanalytics team. So just wanted to acknowledge. I also want to say that Professor Kundu has been an integral part of sort of making sure an analysis is robust, and he will speak a little bit about that a little later. Amit Kapoor and his colleague Kevin Stolarek also have contributed with a paper on creative economy and bringing some of their competitiveness thinking to this. So we've tried to collaborate with a few people. So I'm sharing work, which is that effort. Now, what I'm going to do is essentially what we are looking for, as we go. I mean, one is basically 3 types of sort of feedback, responses, questions to our work. One, will present some analysis, the kind of analytics we have done on the Delhi NCR economy and some of the other dimensions of climate and equity and things like that. Then we've sort of tried to come up with some of our early perceptions of what certain pathways, solutions could be going forward over the next 15, 20 years. And then third, actually, we are also, now that we've done this, what are the sort of institutional mechanisms, governance frameworks, that who are the people we could take this work to so that, we are able to translate some of these ideas into actually mainstream policy making. So in a way, we're looking for these sort of 3 broad sort of feedback. So as you're also looking at this work, it would be great if you can sort of keep that in mind. OP sir just sort of laid this out, the ambition of, the 5 trillion economy and, which is to double the GDP in the short term. But we are also seeing that, the economy has sort of lost a little bit of momentum because of COVID. And, especially MSME sector, hospitality, retail have been quite impacted. Why? So, what we thought, more and more, I think metropolitan regions are becoming the first order units of a global economy. And, in a metropolitan region, assets are concentrated. So, I mean, the argument is that having the concentration of actors reduces transaction costs, increases productivity, and also increases interactions, which actually creates the innovation, which allows for the sort of exponential growth both in economy and population that we see. There are also costs. I mean, there are economic costs, higher densities, population, pollution, congestion, exposure to later while vulnerability to climate risks. And how do you sort of balance this while building sort of assets that make you sort of competitive in a way, right? So the economic, physical, and the networking assets that make you competitive. We chose Delhi NCR for very obvious reasons. It is now 8% of the GDP. It is the leading, it overtook Mumbai or MMR as the leading sort of economic region of the country. It has received about 75 billion in FDI over the last decade and will soon become the largest urban agglomeration globally, overtaking Tokyo, right? What is Delhi NCR? What did we look at? Basically 25 districts across 4 states is sort of what we have been looking at as the Delhi NCR. But, then we went and looked at how planning is done today. And what you see is these sort of very disparate sort of land use master plans that are there. And of course, the regional plan that is developed by the NCR Planning Board. So these are essentially the sort of plans that currently exist. But then we decided to look at the economy or the economic extent based on some of the other factors, right? So this is what you are seeing here is this is actually urban built up growth. So it is a satellite analysis of urban built up growth across decades. So what you see in orange is the new built up, is the new concrete or the new grain between 2010 and 2020. And you can see how the growth over the years has been sort of really moving out to the peripheries. We can also look at geographic extent, looking at other parameters. So we've looked at internet usage and the density of internet usage, establishments, which is, and also the metro alignment and how sort of growth has happened along that. And what we wanted to do is, again, today, since, we start with, what we thought is what we'll do is we'll try to identify, say, the top economic sectors that will continue to be competitive in the next 10 to 15 years, develop an understanding of the demography, understand also sort of the impact of sort of climate change and pollution, etc. But essentially with that, develop a regional economic plan or a frame or a sketch. I mean, we're a concept plan almost, if you want to call it. Identify sort of what would be a strategic spatial plan. In a strategic spatial plan, one would think about strategic projects, which are more infrastructure projects, like whether it was the dry port that was built or, the RRTS that is coming up, or whether it's, it's a green lung that is created in the city that is supposed to support the entire region. So some strategic projects which actually have a regional implication, and then identify places that will become then, for which we can develop local economic development plan. So idea is that the regional economic plan provides a strategic spatial plan, which identifies certain strategic projects or looks at projects that are already there, but how do you make them sort of, much more effective to help the economy, to identify places that can then have local plans with sort of the keen understanding of, either improving the economy or increasing the inclusion or, creating more sort of sustainability in the region. And finally, I think these two things can then provide as inputs into the master plans that, individual, jurisdictions will do. So with that thought, basically we decided to look at the region in 2 classifications. So one was basically in terms of sort of the, tertiary, secondary, primary, basically creative and knowledge centers, the manufacturing centers, and basically other districts with this classification. And what we did is we basically we've looked at sort of 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th economic census data at the Delhi NCR level and specialized it. So this is basically the specialization of the 6th economic census data. It tells you where it's basically employment, And this is the circle sort of suggests the employment size and also the location. So it's also showing where certain types of industries are clustering, and can we use that as an opportunity to think about some strategic ways in which these industries could be made competitive. Based on a quick analysis, these were the top 10 sort of industries that emerged, where we looked at employment share, location quotient, and shift share. And clearly, again, a lot of the manufacturing related industries, automobile, metal, textile, come out to the top, compared to some of the business services or financial services in the Delhi NCR. The other analysis, again, because this is an economic geography study, we decided to do was, just like the classification, we looked at basically broke the region in 3 geographies. So Delhi NCT, which is which is the state of Delhi really. In urban periphery, or what we are calling the CNCR periphery. So it is for Faridabad, Gurgaon, Noida, Ghaziabad. So that is what we are calling as the urban periphery or the CNCR periphery, and then the rest of the region. And then we were starting to look at, how, employment has sort of evolved across these regions. So one of the things that is, quite clear is, and here we looked at basically 4 economic censuses starting 1990. Happened in the periphery, in the CNCR periphery, which is Faridabad, Gurgaon. I mean, in fact, between the last 2, 5th and 6th economic census, we are seeing a negative growth in employment within the Delhi NCT. And, is this something that needs to be addressed is a question. Just again, sort of a more, this is basically showing you the sectors. So what is in red are sectors that have seen what is in less than 0, basically what is in yellow have seen less than 5% growth in employment, and what is in green is what you are seeing as at greater than 5% growth in employment between 2005 and 2013. So again, if you see, I mean, a lot of these sort of high value or the creative industries, business services, electrical equipment, transport equipment is all in the CNCR. What we see in NCT is rubber, plastics, products, basic metals, textiles. So a lot of the manufacturing is here, and also hotels and restaurants, so tourism sort of affiliated businesses as well. And in the rest of the region, it's mostly agriculture, right? It's I mean, other than that, I mean, it has been sort of very little sort of economy has gone beyond the CNCR. This is, I'm not going to go into the detail of this. This is the location quotient analysis by the top 20 sectors by the 3 regions. Again, if you can look at just what are the top, again, you can see, I mean, one of the things that is clear is that, things like rubber, plastics, right? A lot of it is still inside the Delhi and in Delhi NCT, right? We are starting to see some movement to CNCR, but very little movement to the rest of the region. So if you look at rubber, plastics, I mean, the other thing is, transport equipment, electrical, optical equipment, so automotive basically, and electronics manufacturing is also clearly something that the Delhi NCR has a competitive advantage on things. And relatively, I mean, business services, etc., are huge opportunities to grow, but not, I mean, it's growing very fast. There has been a growth, but not very competitive compared to the rest of India, which is say Pune, Bangalore, Hyderabad. So again, happy to share these details with you all as well. The other striking feature, and I don't think this is unique to Delhi NCR, I think this is unique to the whole world, is the sectors that are producing the GDP growth, business services, financing, insurance, transport, are not necessarily producing that many jobs. And, I mean, given the kind of demography that the Delhi NCR has, I think we almost, and this is a question, okay, do we need to think about a twin strategy of growing jobs and growing the economy? And it is sort of becoming quite evident that, employment, employment and GDP sort of, I think, so this is if you are not necessarily, linear in relationship. So Just wanted to show a few other things that sort of might help some of the ideas that we are thinking about as solutions. So this is the population. So you can again see a de-densification of the jobs in the NCT. We are seeing a de-densification of population as well. Growth rates are definitely lower. Central Delhi is losing population, and a lot of growth in the CNCR periphery, right? So this is sort of clearly emerging. And the other thing that has come out quite stark, I mean, and again, there's more detailed analysis behind this, is there is this whole educated unemployment feature. So there are a lot of people. So there is a big miss, mostly in sort of outside the sort of urban core. I think the aspiration is still for government jobs. And, we are seeing a dramatic reduction in public sector jobs. And so people, it's not like there is not skilling opportunities also, but people don't want to go to those skilling opportunities because, their aspiration. So I think there is a skilling problem, but I also think there is an aspiration problem that we need to think about addressing in especially the rest of the region, in terms of sort of, what kind of jobs, etc., people can take going forward. Just we pulled together a first database of all transport investments in the region. We added it all up. It's about $70 billion of transport investment. I would say between 2000 and 2030. If you add up the RRTS, the Delhi Metro, the two airports, the expressways, and a lot of times when we justify, I'm a transport planner, I come from that world. We always justify that $1 of investment in transport infrastructure will give you 8 to 10 times the growth in economy. So a 70 billion investment should give you a $700 billion economy for Delhi NCR, just using that logic. So what can we do to really make sure that we maximize this investment to do that? So that's and then we also actually worked with a few climate scientists and asked them to downsize the IPCC models to the Delhi NCR region. So they've done it more at almost at a district scale. That's the resolution they can get to. The various scenarios, the 2 degree, the 4.5 degree, the 8 degree, all of those kind of scenarios. And we looked at basically 3 big things. So we looked at the mid-century model 2050 and then brought it to 2035 and then sort of made these predictions. So we looked at water availability, precipitation, and heat. And heat is going to be, an extremely important factor in Delhi NCR. I think businesses today need to be absolutely thinking about it as they plan all their infrastructure, all their, because it's going to dramatically impact productivity, and especially in the months of May, June, July, the scenarios seem to be quite stark. Also, water availability, water pressure. It's not a major risk, but it requires all kinds of things that need to be done, that you maximize the water. That's also, we can't lose water. We need more permeable surfaces. We need to capture all the rainwater that comes, use all of these sort of latest techniques to maximize water that falls. And I think we would be able to manage that risk, and heat risk we'll have to prepare for. So with all of this information, we made an attempt, right? And it was a bit of an creative accounting, but my colleague Vandana actually pulled this together. Is what we managed to do is try to basically do a breakdown of today's economy. So getting further into detail of things like IT, BPM, telecom, media, things that will grow, that we think will grow, also looking at auto and electronics manufacturing. So just I leave it for a couple of minutes. The idea was to construct sort of a distribution of today's economy, and also sort of where it is located geographically, with the idea that, if we were to build scenarios and pathways for tripling the economy, say, whatever year, how can we use this as a starting point to sort of think about those pathways, right? So essentially, for the pathways, we are essentially looking at, what we can grow in terms of the digital economy, the creative industries. Delhi, we're talking about Delhi needs to grow. Can we make a big push on fine and performing arts, fashion, media and entertainment? Of course, boosting manufacturing. So in the immediate periphery, what is the strategy? And then what are the opportunities to grow the economy in the hinterland beyond agri and agri processing. So using these three things, how do we construct the pathways to the future? So with that, I'm going to sort of come to these questions. I'm not, that we are sort of, and I'll show you some initial analysis we have done on this. So should we revive the Delhi NCT, right? Should we bring high value jobs back to Delhi NCT? This has the best infrastructure access. We've put the metro there. We've spent close to $10 billion or more to build the metro there. There's good access to services, water, other things. How do we bring more jobs back to Delhi? And should we then focus on, because land values are high, should we look at bringing high value jobs to Delhi NCT? What would that mean? Should we move? See, there is that recent Delhi MPD, the 2041 MPD talks about actually banning, they've banned activities in textile, in rubber, in plastic in Delhi NCR. They are moving, our analysis, location quotient analysis showing it's moving to CNCR. Is there a strategy that can be adopted to push them directly to the rest of the region, to places like Sonipat, Panipat, Mewat? Then, security is a big issue. And especially when it comes to competitiveness with the southern cities on business services, on creative industries. So can you look at an innovations district approach, maybe around the ICAT, which is the new automotive testing center that has been established in Manesar? Can we create a street which has, the cafes, the nightlife? Can we do something in Noida like that? How are we, can we use like a more sort of an acupuncture approach of trying to create these safe spaces that allows these to be attractive for young people and drive innovation? Like I said, transport is a big investment. These RRTS stations, Modinagar, Meerut, how can you, there are good plans on sort of physical plans, but how do we attract economy? What is sporting goods? Can we do something around sporting goods and Meerut? What is the economy that the Meerut should attract? And, how do we think about it? And then, of course, certain questions about sort of good economies for the rest of the region. And then these two tough questions, right? GDP will grow, but not necessarily jobs. So how should the region be thinking about growing the jobs in the economy? And how important do you think, air pollution and climate risks are? And what kind of institutions or governance should be adopted to address it, right? Or to prepare for it. Just to show, we were also looking at some international cases. This is, London, this happened to London, this happened to New York, the de-densification of the core. London in 1990, London actually lost population, right? And then in 1990, the London plan, basically, since then, they have sort of systematically attempted at increasing high value jobs in the city center. London has tripled the number of jobs in city center. If you look at de Blasio's new plan for New York, it's about actually creating jobs more for middle class. So it's more the sort of middle and lower middle class, technical jobs for lower middle class. So is that so? So one is this question of, do we need to go back to densification of the core, especially with the jobs? And can we use these creative economy institutions? So what you're saying, and this is sort of something, this is what we also got a lot of help from with Amit Kapoor and his colleague Kevin Stolarek. Basically, this is a map of the black is the institutions of education, and the red dots are basically the creative economy sort of industries in Delhi NCR. Just one last thing I wanted to show, the new MPD, the new master plan for Delhi for 2041 has these guidelines for sort of reduce for these industries, textile, rubber, plastic, basic metals. They just want not all the industry, but certain activities to be moved out. And, right now these are concentrated in the Delhi NCT. This is rubber, plastic, petrol. This is textile. Is it, should we move it to the region? And, who takes the lead? How do we incentivize it? What is the negotiation between the Delhi and that region? So any thoughts on that? Yeah. And just to say that, a lot of this analysis was also built on a set of these papers that we worked with different experts. So, these sort of papers are also available for someone to sort of look through, where we looked at MSMEs, looked specifically at the auto and textile industry. And like I said, the climate analysis and things like that, this is sort of available in detail. I'm going to leave essentially with sort of these broad questions and essentially open it up for a conversation. So I can leave the questions up if you think, but I think we'll close the presentation and I'll stop sharing. And sort of actually build a conversation around this. So yeah. So with that, I mean, I'm just maybe we'll do a round. We'll go around and before that, what I wanted to also, sorry, one I wanted to do is Professor Kundu has actually been an integral part of this work. He's actually helped us a little bit with he's helped us a lot with the methodologies on the economic analysis and things like that. So Professor, maybe you want to take 5 minutes and talk about, how you pushed us to make this analysis more robust, and actually some thoughts you have on sort of how these things could be advanced.
Thank you, Madhav. Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. Madhav, inviting a retired professor who has not spoken for 5 minutes summary is a risk that you're taking. It's a privilege for me to associate with this regional geographic approach study of WRI, which, as Agarwal Sahab mentioned, envisages cities as not only as centers of growth, but also enablers of growth. It should be able to absorb the people who are migrating into the region and also promote growth at the national level. I just want to flag 3 technical issues which will enable the panelists to appreciate the significance of the conclusions that Madhav has presented. One is that the analysis is based at the moment at the district level data. And well, we have the plan of looking at the settlement level information also to get into the greater details. We have 30 districts. Out of them, many were not existing in 1990 when our database begins. In fact, even after 2013, there have been addition of districts in Delhi, NCT, and also in other 3 states, Rajasthan, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh. But we have restricted to 30 districts. But I must tell you, enormous effort has been made by the team in building up the data for district level income, poverty estimates, consumption expenditure, all because new districts have been created. Sometimes districts have been bifurcated. So using similar methodology as the Ministry of Statistics uses, the CSO uses, or perhaps making slight improvement, we have been able to generate massive data for 170 indicators on a more or less comparable basis at 4 points of time. Of course, it ends with economic census 2013, but for several indicators, we have been able to update the information also. And I do believe that these research studies which have been sponsored by WRI can certainly use this rich database that has been built, and also it can be used by others if the WRI rules permit. That is first point. The second point that strikes me about this study is the use of the satellite data, along with the socioeconomic data which are generated by the administrative processes. Generally, whenever you look at studies which are addressing the issues of sustainability and environment, you see a robust analysis at the disaggregative level, district, taluka level or state level, and then suddenly you bring in some big maps from satellite data and you say, okay, perhaps it can be used as really a scaffolding. Some kind of a minor changes in the recommendation comes in. There is some noise because of some spraying by the municipality. So basically what I'm saying is that, to my mind, there are not many studies which really integrate the satellite data, putting it to the administrative unit, for which we have massive data being generated by the regular agencies, and analyze them together. Generally what happens, you analyze the socioeconomic data and bring in the satellite data as an afterthought to modify some of the conclusions. Here, they are integral part of the whole analysis. And the third point, which I think Madhav did mention, the use of the economic census data, which has been very, very scanty. There are 4 economic census data that we have used. The 7th economic census 2019, the data should be available. it should be possible within 3-4 months if another study is launched to include that. And economic census data has serious problems. I'm not really blaming the social scientists to ignore this massive data source, but it has certain advantages. Annual survey of industries data cannot, even the small scale industry survey data are not available at district level. The sample size is small and also the location identification is difficult. Whereas the economic census data gives information at the district level, and there are problems of comparability. So what we tried to do is to make the data somehow much more robust than it was originally meant. In fact, Madhav did mention that Delhi recorded a decline in the total employment during 2005 and 13. And the people in the Department of Economics and Statistics say, sorry, we do not accept that. So we talked to them and found out how we can improve this database. And I think that is something mentioned that NCR has been a dynamic and a vibrant region, and that is indeed true, which is what is emerging in terms of overall growth in the regional income. As I said, we have calculated district level income, added it up, and we got the estimates for NCR, and we do find that the growth rate of regional income is much higher than the GDP growth rate, employment growth rate overall, despite the decline and shifting of industry from NCT, overall employment growth has been higher, has been a dominant factor, despite the fact that NCT has 85% of the total value added coming from tertiary sector. But if you take the whole region, you do find that the manufacturing is not insignificant. Economic census says that overall in the country, it is 22% of the total workers outside agriculture, which is in manufacturing. In NCR, it is 33%. So, and also the share of manufacturing in the country as a whole is about 17%. And it has slightly gone down. I looked at the latest data, but as far as region is concerned, despite the fact that in the last few years, the NCT has recorded significant, the Delhi National Capital Territory has recorded significant growth in tertiary sector, but as a region, we do find manufacturing remains an important thing. The second point that I want to mention about the finding, which was there very much in Madhav's presentation. Now, there have been studies in WRI before I got the privilege of associating with it, analyzing the changes in the structure of the economy. Binoy had done significant analysis looking at the employment in different industries and how it has shifted through location quotient. But what was not answered in those studies is whether this is promoting efficiency, and whether it is sustainable, promoting sustainability and energy efficiency. For answering this question, economic census data is not enough because we don't have information about the economic efficiency. So what we did is to take the CLEMS data coming from Reserve Bank of India, which really gives efficiency parameters. So there are 4 indicators that we have taken. One is growth in total factor productivity. Second, growth in labor productivity. Third, growth in energy efficiency. And fourth is level of energy efficiency. And by doing that, what we have identified is the 10 top industries in India and 10 top industries in NCR. And basically trying to see whether Delhi is matching with the efficiency parameter at the national level. So what we notice that in terms of 3 efficiency parameters, that is total factor productivity, labor productivity, and energy efficiency, level of energy efficiency, Delhi is doing better than the country, which means that the larger percentage of workers are in the efficient industries compared to the national level. So basically what we find out, therefore, from the analysis is that Delhi's overall growth pattern has been certainly promoting efficiency in terms of the standard efficiency parameters which are defined at the national level. I know we should have time for discussion and maybe we can answer some of the questions. Final one point that really tells me the area of concern, which is we find that although it is true that Delhi is having concentration of those industries, a larger percentage of workers in those industries which are energy efficient. But if you look at the trend, if you look at the industries which are showing significant improvement in energy efficiency, those are the industries which are not growing. And that's the concern that Madhav has been raising. That there are certain industries which are located in NCT, central part of the NCR, and that they are really coming in conflict with the trend. What we find that at the national level, there is shift to those industries which are reporting improvement in energy efficiency, whereas Delhi is having an advantage in the level of energy efficiency, but the industries which are showing significant improvement in energy efficiency, that shift has not taken place. And also there are some infrastructural concern. I think Agrawal Sahab often raises the issue of transport connectivity to facilitate to some extent this shifting that has taken place. Overall, NCR has been dynamic, vibrant, whereas the manufacturing sector has shifted from central part to the immediate periphery. They need to be shifted further. There are certain policies which we have reviewed which are helping this process, but this trend needs to be supported. And the fact that Delhi is not really moving towards those industries which are showing significant improvement in energy efficiency is something which is a matter of concern. I think other question that Madhav has raised for discussion is extremely important, and I'm sure we'll have very useful discussion. Thank you, Madhav.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you very much for your support. So now we'll start, maybe take first 3-4 minutes, maybe you respond with your early thoughts, and then we can do another round. So maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Samir Sharma. So you can go first. And
good afternoon. Officer, sorry I couldn't prepare. I didn't inform you, but I have been appointed as the Chief Secretary of Andhra Pradesh. So I just, I was running around. I'm very sorry.
Congratulations.
So I would have really prepared. Last night was kept aside for but still, I mean, since I know Madhav so well and he's done such a, it's a very useful and for me, it's a very fulfilling sort of a presentation because my PhD was in regional and metropolitan development. And, in the book which I wrote also, I tried to compare what was happening in the US and India. And, I find some great similarities between what Madhav has found and what happened in the US. So I always compare Noida with Gurgaon, the difference. One is an entrepreneurial city. Second, Noida is not that much of an entrepreneurial city. And then, how I used to live in Manesar. So I used to tell my kids, see, Gurgaon is a suburb and we are in an exurb. And that's how I used to explain it to them, taking the American simile. Now, if you look at the US experience also, initially they thought that there would be one central downtown and the centers which are emerging around the cities would be connected to the downtown. And this in the 70s, they developed the idea of metro towns, etc., in which these centers outside the downtown were thought would not be independent. But then, they 1990s, they sort of severed the connection with the original downtown and became quite independent, most famously in Guru's book of Edge Cities, where he called them the Edge Cities. So actually what we are seeing in India, of course, largely fueled by transportation networks plus economic activity, is that we are seeing the emergence of these edge cities. And unlike the US, we have these centers, small centers in Gurgaon. 1980s, think of Faridabad in Gurgaon, think of Noida when they started in the 70s. So all these cities are emerging as the edge cities. Now, slowly, you see this around all the 6 metros, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Mumbai, Chennai, Calcutta, and Delhi. And now, so if you look at it from the theoretical point of view, there are a lot of similarities. And of course, there are differences also. Because unlike US, where they have a very strong planning system, Indian planning system is to a large extent, in the sense it operates differently at ground. You may have some perfect master plan for the region, You have perfect building codes. In fact, 2 days ago only, we found that we had another 70,000 buildings to be regularized under building penalization schemes, 70,000 layouts. So, it's more of a post hoc sort of thing we do. So you have to, so first difference is we do a lot of post hoc work in India. So we plan, make a perfect master plan. But as you know, 20-30% master plan has only been implemented on ground. So there is one thing which you have to face is this, sort of a retrofitting all these things with sewage sanitation, including internal roads, which we found in Gurgaon and also in Noida. So that is one part which is big difference from US, unlike US where edge cities developed. The second major difference which I found, as you rightly said, the economic activity is shifting out. And in the US, it was the people who went first and the jobs followed them later. But India, it is the jobs which are developing and the people are going there. So this is a big difference between what happened in the US in 60s, 70s and what's happening here. The third big difference is, all this is driven by what we call a lot of mobile hot capital. And this mobile capital, sort of hones in on a land piece and then decides we are going to put capital here. And then, all those steel and glass structures come up. Just 2 days ago, Wells Fargo, and they made the biggest establishment this side of the world, including China, etc., in Hyderabad. Amazon has put up their biggest warehouse. So this is what I said. This capital comes, hones in a piece of land, and then, all the things, the land uses are changed, infrastructure is provided. So this is a very different cup of tea when we look at India. And we have to have a different way of theorizing. You can learn something from the West, learn from their experiences, but something very different has to be developed here for all this. And as OP sir always says about metro is required, but not the way it's going on. So, have the linear strips now, as we saw from what Madhav had shown, all the linear strips around roads, around metros. And so this is what is happening in India. It's fascinating, Madhav. For me, it was great listening to you. I mean, that's what I would like to say in the beginning. Thank you.
Bidisha, maybe I can come to you next. Any reflections, thoughts?
Yes, so first I must compliment you on the very excellent work that you've done, the entire team, the data that you've put up, and it's really been a very enlightening experience for me to understand how Delhi NCR has developed. So as I understand it, I suppose the manufacturing industries went to the outskirts because of pollution rules. They were not allowed to locate within the city, if that is correct. So that is obviously.
That's in the latest guidelines that were released. The shift hasn't happened, but
Okay.
they will see few months ago, 2 months ago, they put out the new master plan.
Right.
MPV 2041 as they
but
call.
Just to intervene, it's way back in 96-7 when the original shifting of industries issue started. More than 9,000 industries were shifted, and in fact I had my first thesis on that topic only, my planning thesis, the non-conforming industries in Delhi that way. So things have started from by that time, and even the NCR previous plan that also that shifting of industries and all the why the world ocean related office be in Delhi and those kind of institutions should move out of Delhi.
That was my understanding as well, that this has been a long process and maybe more is happening now. But at the same time, in your presentation, you mentioned that services are not that attractive for Delhi. Pune, Bangalore, etc., are more attractive. So how do we handle this? How do we now create more jobs within the Delhi core? There again, I would think that it was dominated by government jobs. And maybe a lot of retail trade, etc., was there. So the reason why it has come down is one, of course, government jobs have come down. So how do you now rejuvenate rejuvenate the inner core of Delhi? Is it only through these tourist, entertainment, media kind of hubs that we can think of, or are there, manufacturing or other services, for example, the BPO, etc., which I'm not sure why they can't locate within the core of Delhi. The other thing I wanted to mention is this, as you develop more infrastructure, it is actually it is never adequate. You tend to attract more people into the city. It becomes more and more crowded. This is what we've seen in Delhi repeatedly. The more flyovers that are created, the traffic jams actually increase. So how do we deal with this problem? So the planning has to be dynamic. We cannot make a plan and stop there. That's number two. And lastly, the one point I wanted to mention is that, we have to look at the quality of life of the people, particularly if we are talking about job creation, employment, then one of the key bottlenecks here is that we do not provide proper facilities for workers. Particularly, so everything in services, you can afford slightly higher end salaries and therefore housing, but in manufacturing, the salaries are lower. And, within the Delhi NCR area, it is very hard to find housing for the workers. And some of the industry members we have tell us that the biggest bottleneck they have in creating jobs is to find proper living. And this we saw during the pandemic. All the migrant workers had to go back because there is no proper living facilities within the city. And that, I think, will be a key bottleneck in creating employment and the kind of employment that we are looking at within the city. And this includes the periphery, not just the core. The housing conditions around the factories are very, very limited. Yeah. I end with these few comments. Thank you.
Professor Balaji, maybe if you can just go around.
Okay. First, let me thank you for the invitation to this panel. I guess, especially considering I know little to nothing about Delhi, so I can't have any substantive comments about the nature of the work. I've done most of my empirical work in Bangalore and Chennai in terms of conceptualizing what I do. But I do think, and certainly of the 3 points that you laid out in terms of where you'd like responses, one is the analytical approach, the second is the question of sustainability and justice, and the third one is about what you can tell policymakers. Again, being far removed from the corridors of power in Delhi, the policymaker thing is not something I can really tell you anything about. It's the first two that I like to say a few things, especially item number one. Okay. And let me, having said that, let me start by commending you and your team on putting together this enormous sort of database, which allows you to sort of start thinking about a metropolitan economy. And having said that, I think this is a very essential, a very, very necessary condition to think about, what policy options you might actually have. But at the same time, I'm also going to say that there are a couple of things you could consider doing to ensure that you meet certain sufficient conditions. Okay, so what you have really here is data. You're looking at the spatial division of labor across the metropolitan region and how that is, you're attempting to reinforce it with providing certain kinds of infrastructure, right? Transportation being a case in point. The thing is, and then there was also mention of all these creating these clusters for for media, whatever, and so on. And then how, like many speakers mentioned, that there was this really a gap between the master plans and what actually takes place, and which is really not a surprise, frankly speaking, because there is a tendency to confuse, I think, or conflate what happens in territorial place with relationships in economic space. And when that disjunction is there, your master plans are willy-nilly going to not take you to the destinations that you'd like you to take them to, right? Also, so, and even then, and on that basis, if you're going to put in transportation infrastructure, I can only, quote the South African Nobel laureate Gertrude Stein when she said there's no there, right? So in order to sort of actually get to understanding what the there is, I think one of the things you could potentially do is to, what studies like this have done and done very well in your case is to look at coarse aggregate data, right? In the sense you look at, for example, firms and necessary institutions like academic institutions and so on in your slide on media. But I think, what economic geographers will tell you what this, and this has been, over the last 30, 40, you have to crack open the black box of the firm or other organizations. In other words, for a given, say even for a given level of shared technology, different firms organize themselves differently. And they seize competitive advantage by going through different kinds of vertical integration or disintegration. And by then on that basis, integrating with interacting with their surroundings. And that's where this whole notion of transactions costs really come in. Now, merely putting in firms next to one another does not guarantee lowering of transactions costs if they do not transact. So you really need to understand what is it that is going to drive them to actually transact. And for that, I think what is going to be crucial or will be very helpful is to actually do a few detailed studies of how in similar sectors, right? Like say textiles, right? You take a sample of maybe 25, 30 firms and how is it that they organize their production? Because firms, organize themselves differently, like I said, and to seize competitive advantage with the same technology, by organizing themselves differently, they rely on their partners. Now, here too, it also depends on what kind of partnerships or collaborations or contracting arrangements there are. One could just be contracting for capacity, up and down, you handle that. Now, that with diminishing transport costs, you could push it off to another corner of the country. It doesn't have to stay in Delhi, right? Because it's all codified knowledge to bring in sort of some epistemic basis for this. Alternatively, it could be complementary capabilities, which you don't have, but you rely on a partner. Now, there, the need for spatial proximity is greater. Finally, if you're going to bring in something that's new to the market, new to the country, then you don't clearly have an understanding. You're working with your collaborator or partner, then you're trying to figure it out jointly, then the need for spatial proximity is even greater. So the kind of work that these firms are organizing, and this applies even to academic organizations, like what kind of research are you doing? Is it sort of really plain, vanilla teaching, which is important, but are you also at the frontiers of what you're doing? Who do you collaborate with? Are you collaborating with other firms? Are you collaborating with academic institutions, right? So this kind of cracking open that black box of organizations and firms through, and I think the only way to do that is going to be through sort of perhaps some close ethnographic studies. You do interviews with managers, labor, and policymakers to get an insight into how they conceptualize. This is very important. And if you'll bear with me for another minute or so, I'd like to add a couple of points here. See, the larger question is, how is it, if you wanted to understand the industry's evolution, you have to understand where is it that the technologies are going and how they see themselves actually organizing themselves along this sort of changing technological frontier, right? And so if we don't do that, and if we don't understand this organization of production, or whether it's services, whether it is manufacturing, whatever it is, right? We are not going to understand how is the relationship between firms taking place. We're just going to understand them as dots, and they will function according to their own internal logic and dissipate. The master plan is going to go to pieces very quickly. Those are relationships in economic space that I was talking about, right? And then it's only on that basis, then you will determine, you'll be able to get an insight into the kind of labor requirements that are there. The labor markets then start to kick in. And those labor markets might be purely locally identified labor markets. It might be supplied to immigration, through migration, like for various categories, depending on what is it that is done internally, outside, okay? And the kind of other requirements that are generated, whether it's for construction or for whatever it is, right? So those labor market requirements then need to be sort of factored in depending on the nature of depending on how production is actually organized. And that in turn, I think, is what is going to lead to understanding of sort of, because to the more normative questions, what is it that we mean by sustainability? What is it that we mean by justice? Rather than posing those questions up front, I think understanding this analytically is going to be crucial to getting to those sorts of questions. Let me stop here and maybe I'll come back with a few more comments at the next round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rana, maybe you want to go next and.
Yeah, sure. Madhav, thank you very, very much. Superb presentation. A few points. Number one, when you're looking at de-agglomeration, so, you know, this always happens. I mean, you have, look at the case of Manhattan. There you have a lot of textile garments producers, and then as the city develops, gets richer, land prices become expensive, these manufacturers move out. And fundamentally, there are two things. Theoretically, we know from economic geography work that two things that are working. One is transport cost, transport time, and the other thing is land cost and land availability. Now, naturally, you know, as India's transport networks improve, you are going to see this, this deconcentration. But my fear in the Indian context is the following, is that the de-agglomeration you're seeing is you know, the one due to transport networks is good, but there's another element of de-agglomeration you're seeing, which is being driven by land use rigidities in urban and peri-urban areas. And I really think this is a very important issue to look at. And in fact, Madhav, you know, it ties into stuff that your other WRI colleagues have been doing about just Indian cities and how flat they are, etc. So I think this issue of land use management and land use regulations is really critical. And I wonder, in fact, you know, this disharmony between master planning and what actually happens is really partly due to the rigidities in land use management. And unless I think we tackle that, we are going to continue to see our cities underperform. In fact, you know, if you look at the US literature, it's very clear that when you look at GDP growth, you break it down. It really comes from the fact that few cities are ones which spark the growth and resources move in. And in fact, to the extent that we're seeing this process getting short-circuited in the US, the culprit is really the issue of land use regulations. So you have the whole San Jose area, LA area, any of these places which have put in rigid land use policies are the ones where you're going to see skyrocketing land use prices. And then, you know, this issue of jobs that you talked about, it's not going to be affordable. So fundamentally, I think in your analysis, you've got to somehow bring in this whole issue of land use management. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is just it's one of governance. You know, I'm no expert at all in this area, but in the limited work that I've done, and you know, when I've looked at how China is always this great example because it's the polar opposite, where you have the famous Chinese mayor who is completely empowered to do whatever they like, even bend labor regulations, even pay off central government taxes if needed to help firms. But it's a very good example because I think it shows to us the following principle, that where you don't have coordination between, again, your land use planning and let's say the industrial development agencies, you're going to again see these I think suboptimal patterns. So in metropolitan governance, I realize, I mean, it's already such a challenge to bring all these different urban agencies together, but somehow we do have to think about mechanisms which allow for the state industrial development agencies to liaise better or work better with town planning agencies, etc. I don't know what the answer is. I think in Gujarat, my impression is it works much better. For example, in the Special Investment Region Act, you do have the Industrial Development Agency, which is at the apex, and town planning responds to that. I think in Andhra Pradesh also there's the Ayala, which also has that structure. So I think governance is another thing. I think as you push your study further, it would be really nice to look at this issue of governance in metropolitan areas, and in particular, 3 agencies: state industrial development agencies, the town planning folks, and the transport decisions. I think fundamentally, this is not to say that water supply sanitation is important, but simply from a jobs perspective, industrial development perspective, I think these 3 are crucial: the land, the state industrial development agencies, and the transport network. On data, we can have a side discussion, because as you know, our team has been working on looking at combining satellite imagery, redefining cities, and then merging it all with economic census data and ASI frame data. So the ASI frame, we're right now working on it. The nice thing about the ASI frame is it's there for 2013, 2017, 2018, and it gives you much better location data than the ASI, which, as you rightly pointed out, is only, sorry, Professor Kundu pointed out, is only giving you information at the state. It's I think post 2009, we don't even know what district plants are located in. So on data, it'll be nice to have a separate conversation. I'll just say this much, that I do think you should split your economic census establishment information by on the basis of size. This is something I've noticed, that we've talked a lot about manufacturing in India moving to rural areas. That's partly just a fiction. When it's basically how you define rural. The moment you use satellite imagery data and start redefining what rural and urban are, I mean, the way we've looked at it is firms are yes, they've moved away from the within the municipal boundaries, of course, they've moved away, but these are clearly urban areas when you look at it from the sky. And that's where manufacturing is. It ties in very much with what industrial park developers have told me, which is they don't want to set up industrial parks more than 50, 60 kilometers away from a major urban center. It's not going to happen. We can talk about backward districts, etc. But the reality is you want to be close to major markets. You want to be close to big transport hubs. Finally, your point on jobs. I mean, this is how I got interested in urbanization. Because we've been looking at jobs from the perspective of firms, and then we started realizing that, it's something special about cities. Certain types of cities attract certain type of entrepreneurs, and that gives you certain types of jobs. Now, on that, all I'll say is that we need to look at interlinkages. Every single city that you look at will have a set of tradable jobs and non-tradable jobs. And essentially, what makes a city tick is probably going to be 20% of the jobs. It's not that every firm in the city is going to be a dynamo, but you need those anchor jobs, etc. And then it's basically these interlinkages, whether it's supply or demand linkages, input-output linkages. I think that jobs angle, we need to be a little careful, therefore, not just look at specifically, how many jobs a particular industry brings, but also you've got to look at the interlinkages. So anyways, let me just stop there. Those are some initial thoughts I had, but really great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. And, we can talk a little more about ASI frame as well. And I think the interlinkages point that you make is really quite crucial, and I think in going forward, something that needs to be thought about quite closely. So no, thank you, great inputs, and of course we will talk more. Amit, your responses, you've seen some of the early versions of this work, so I think just overall reactions, thoughts, how can we make this more robust? How do you see it being useful?
Thank you. Thanks, Madhav. I think this has been a great learning experience with all the experts talking about the work. Just 2 or 3 points. I'll not take more than 2 minutes of your time. In fact, just following up from the basic sets of things. Like one is, of course, we will have to understand one thing very clearly as to how movement of people is actually happening. And because that is a huge bearing on the competitiveness. And when I say movement of people, it is from within the NCR itself, because that actually has a huge bearing on productivity, if you're able to get that data coming in. The second thing onto the data you were saying, if I'm able to put it on, put the consumption data on top of this gives me a huge understanding as to how things, or how economically things are happening. Right now, we're just looking at the larger bit in terms of how the state is stacking up, or how the city is stacking up. But if I'm able to put it with consumption data, that could be something very, very powerful. The third thing, which I feel is something very interesting, we have looked at the annual survey of industry data. I can see that economic census data has been looked at, but then there is this PLFS data, which can give us far bigger insights in terms of like how labor is behaving and things. Because economic census and PLFS data do really have a huge level of juxtaposition, but I think there could be some very powerful insights that emerge from there as well. So that could be something very, very interesting if I'm able to look at and get some of those insights. And one more point, which I feel is very important, and that is when we really talk about planning for the future, I think that this whole industry set, the industry map, gives me a very interesting point of view. But I think what we are really going to see in the future, in the coming 3 to 5 years or 10 years, most of the industries that we are really talking about are really going to become service industries. When you talk about mobile mobility or car as a service or mobile mobility as a service or whatever, most of the things are really going to get servicized, or servicization of industries going to happen. So we will actually need a very different set of skill set within people that we are looking at. If I'm able to look at some comparative thing in terms of, say, how various cities have really come up over a period of time, there has always been an upliftment of, or there has been an uptick in terms of how talent has actually got acquired. Delhi has its own sets of problems in terms of like what is the availability of talent and so on and so forth. We can talk about some exotic industries like IT, services, or whatever, but does Delhi have the adequate talent which is available to really push it forward? Is a very important factor that we will have to look at. So some kind of a outlook on how talent has to be looked at. And when you were really looking at the data, I think NCR is emulating what is happening within the country. There is a great reflection of what happens within the country. So if we really get this model right, I think there is a huge possibility of how do we get India right as well. Because if there is a city, there is a region which tells that there are industry sets which are improving, there is jobless growth, or whatever, and that can actually give us a huge indication as to what is really happening. But then one or two more things, like one is of course what you would call as the degglomeration effects that happen within the city. There are huge degglomeration effects that we are seeing within the city. In fact, there was a point on quality of life that was being said. The larger thing is that how is the quality of life improving or decreasing within the space that we are really talking about. If we talk about NCR, there are going to be locations which do well or whatever, but there are going to be locations which are fundamentally unlivable in many, many ways. And if I'm able to use this data and juxtapose this whole economic data with social data, that could be something very powerful again, like, because what we are really seeing is that there are two trajectories or two directions that we are really talking about. Like one is of course economic growth and the other one has to be the social progress. When you talk about quality of life, it suddenly is about social progress. Can I actually look at various aspects of social progress within this? Because when you talk about, say, water and sanitation, the effect of climate change, what is going to happen about personal safety, access to basic knowledge, is that whole clustering that is really happening in the perfect sense. And last but not the least, and in fact, I think Professor Balaji did allude to that a very important point in clustering. And that is that in India, typically what we are really looking at as a cluster is an agglomeration of firms. We have to see as to how knowledge sharing happens between various sets of firms. And if that knowledge sharing is possible, and if I'm able to understand that knowledge sharing within the space, I am able to give some better insights in terms of like how the cities need to go further, what kind of strategic imperatives could be there, what industries to really focus on. At the end of the day, like if we really talk about NCR, there are multiple regions that we are really talking about. So strategy based on, say, advantages that each of those smaller districts, when you talk about 30 districts, each of these districts has a unique positive, negative, or whatever, and probably we can actually create something around that. But at the end of the day, to really say that we are going to see movement of people outside of Delhi, I don't think so. It can only happen, or it would have happened, if there were other alternate cities that would have been emerging. India has a distinct problem in urbanization. And that is that it is only very limited in terms of like what are the urbanization or cities which are just going to attract talent or industry and so on and so forth. So we are talking about good 3 to 4 decades before Delhi actually sees some bits in terms of agglomeration or whatever. It's really going to attract a lot of people. And that's what I really anticipate. So over to you, Madhav. Thanks a lot for the opportunity, please.
Thanks. Abhijit, do you want to say something before we go on to another round of responses?
Sure. First of all, I'm very honored to be part of this esteemed gathering, and I should say, and all thanks to my boss she could not attend, and I was nominated here, and it was lovely hearing everybody, and it's nice to know that so many great heads are thinking about the NCR, and while in NCR PB, it seems like it's only our how are we managing it's our problem only. It's not our problem. It's everybody's problem, and we are managing it. Just few things. First of all, regarding NCR, you did show that the whole of NCR as a 24-25 districts is 24 districts plus Delhi. But all the data, I'm not sure if it is for all those districts or it's only on the agglomeration area, that is Delhi and the surrounding areas. Because even what the reports say, various reports that Delhi NCR is going to shoot beyond Tokyo in this decade and will be the most populous city in the world by 2030. So everybody, when they talk about Delhi, it's the Delhi and surrounding areas, the continuous agglomeration area. And what we are talking is 24 districts, that is 14 districts of Haryana.
So we have also assessed all districts, all 25 districts.
Okay. So the data that you're saying is of considering all the districts, because the map is only the Delhi and surrounding areas. Second thing, I would say that we, in this regional plan, what we are preparing, the draft regional plan is there. Delhi, this NCR was originally 33,000 square kilometers, and now it is 55,000 square kilometers. And although the objective originally was the catering to the problem of Delhi, getting everybody coming to Delhi for jobs and everything, to develop the surrounding area so that that problem is minimized to an extent. Yes, the population migration did reduce in the last decades. The 2011 census showed that, but that is not only due to our plan, but many more efforts that are being done. So I would just inform that now the NCR plan will be having some policy zones that we have decided. And in these policy zones, first is of course Delhi, and the CNCR, what has been talked, it is being defined. The CNCR shall be up till this expressway and some 5 kilometers around that area. That is the central NCR, where that's continuous agglomeration that has been identified, noted, and accordingly the next when we say it should shift to rural, which rural? Rural in Mewat is also rural, and rural in just adjacent districts is also rural. So what our focus now is that yes, the consumers are in the urban areas, and the producers want to be closest to the consumers so that the distance, their waste time, all that travel time is minimized. And so thinking of having this logistics separate aspect to be focused on, so that the cost constraint of the land is also minimized for the producer, and the market is also having things in time, especially for the perishable goods. Always these urban areas are dependent on the surrounding areas. Then we identified and noted the issue of migration. So we are planning to have migration facility centers in each urban and rural areas as well, where they will be, what are their skills, levels, education levels, their background check and everything will be on a GIS based sort of a portal sort of a thing, so that at the point of exit they know where are the possibilities they will earn good income, and what are the areas where they need to upgrade their skills also. With that, they will be integrated with the skill development councils. That sort of some mechanism is being proposed in the draft sort of a thing. Then security is major issue, yes, and security is these are separate chapters, separate heads being prepared in this coming draft region plan. And recently we have launched a geo portal also, having some more than 100-120 layers of data where things can be updated, and this being shared among all the states so that they can update the data also, and that can be used for planning purposes and all the decision making things. That portal would help. That has been launched recently in our last board meeting. So just add to that information. And yes, housing is a major aspect, and like ma'am said, that housing for the workers. So a separate policy is being thought about for that purpose, so that the travel distance between the factories and the manufacturing sector buildings and their houses is minimized. They have in a house within the colony sort of a residential thing, and how to compensate such things for the person who has to do away with the costly land for this purpose. That is also some the innovative things like transfer of development rights and TOD, and these aspects are being considered. So yes, we are working, and this plan will be shortly in public, and we would love to have with all the vast knowledge we have, your valuable suggestions, comments on that, so that it can add further value to the plan, which is for another 20 years. And yes, it has to be dynamic, so the plans are also thought to be reviewed every 5 years. It's not that once the plan is made and then you just sit on it and just see the implementation of why and how and point fingers at each other, but the plan is dynamic and we review it that way. Just another few things. Economy is a major chapter of the this plan, and it is giving around 10 pillars of economy, based on which the whole whatever we are thinking or presuming for the region will work. Otherwise, just writing things won't help. It has to be brought on ground, and it has to be, what do you say, feasible and reachable and implementable. That is the thing. And we have listed a very broad list of projects also, which will be of regional importance, and they can help. And we are coming up with some outer ring roads and ring rail economic corridors. These are also being proposed along with currently already ongoing this KMP expressway. We have rings further to that. So those will be the economic corridors also, and the rail links are also being proposed around that thing. So a mix of various aspects is being considered, and it's a very citizen-centric, inclusive sort of a plan we are coming with. And I think that will help the NCR, one future-ready NCR, what we are talking about now. Thank you.
Abhijit, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just when do you think the draft plan will be out? I mean,
another month, because we have a meeting next month, and then we'll be open for public objection sessions.
Okay. And how long will be the sort of the consultation?
It's a month. It's a month window, 30 days. Everything as per the act.
Yeah.
Within that.
Dr. Samir Sharma, can I ask you? I mean, I think in a way to also respond to some of these thoughts that we had raised, like actually, bringing more jobs into the city center, and the real revival of Delhi NCT. I mean, is that something that could be sort of thought out, and how? I mean, you understand Delhi quite well, so I mean, how would you think that process could be triggered in a way?
You're asking how jobs can be brought back into the city center, right?
Should we bring high value jobs back into the city center? And do you think that is even a good suggestion? And if that is the case, how would one go about it? Just any sort of broad thoughts.
Okay. I'll go a little at the micro level. Now let us take up the Mayapuri industrial estate, right? It's a mess, absolutely. And people now, in pieces, they are giving permissions for banquet halls. So since the only permission they're allowing is banquet hall, everything is becoming a banquet hall without parking. A better model would be to make it like BKC, So develop Mayapuri. It could be an IT hub. It could be a cuisine hub. It could be anything. It could also be a marriage hub with banquet halls with a layout and a plan for that. So in this way, you could bring in at least more service jobs. But if you want high-end jobs, then IT. Imagine if you put an IKEA there, you do a town planning scheme, put an IKEA. Imagine that. So that sort of thing, they have to reimagine all the industrial hubs, which are anyway going outside. Now, industrial hubs are going beyond Manesar now into Rajasthan and even ends of Haryana. So in this way, they have to reimagine the city and redevelop it. They have to redevelop these pockets all around. One thing which Government of India, as you know, is also doing those 7 colonies, which they are now making into office, commercial and residential. These 7 colonies, including one near Sarojini Nagar. So this sort of thing can bring in jobs, both service jobs and high-end jobs. But this a little more holistic plan for that area. I just give an example of Mayapuri because I had gone the other day to Mayapuri, and I was seeing there's so many banquet halls coming up without parking, just banquet halls, which means all marriages happen, which is a need. I mean, I'm not saying not required, but just develop a plan, give the infrastructure, have parking, and so that sort of a thing. Now, that is if you want to have jobs. But I look at it in a different way. Why not have jobs? I'm not saying anything about that, but why not have people living in the center and going out high speed and coming back? Just have the opposite of what US had. They had a downtown where people used to come. Now they no longer come in that way. And then let them come in again into the center. But it all depends on the spatial structure of the city. If your spatial structure of the city is in the center, if you have a place where people have been staying, what we call the civil lines or the railway lines, or even the Asli city where you have the people staying there, historically for 300, 400 years, do it. Otherwise, as we are saying, pick up areas, and the way they have done Chandni Chowk, the way they have done BKC, they should do it. You will have to retrofit and rejuvenate all these areas. That's
So, this idea of either sort of creating what is sort of these innovation districts, or even sort of having more local sort of plans, is so micro planning in a big way needs to be sort of adopted. And in Delhi, I mean, this would happen through the DDA, and they would be the drivers, I'm presuming.
You see, Mal, if you remember, the master plan was only the first part of DDA. Then they have to prepare zonal plans, local plans. They don't do that. They love these big master plans, big technical rational documents, which hardly represent what's happening on the ground. So they have one road going over 7 buildings. And then we have to, spend years trying to convince the building owners to give their buildings, how to give compensation. That's why the master plan implementation is so poor. It's so unrealistic and so rigid. First, you can't foresee a city for 30 years. Now, tell you, Madh, in 1990s or 2000, could you ever imagine Hyderabad? Other day I was in Hyderabad, since I've shifted to Andhra Pradesh now. So I was looking at this Gachibowli area. Wow, this is amazing. The similarity between that and Gurgaon. But with the advantage that has got a working water system, sanitation system, sewage. It's absolutely amazing. You have to come and see that area. I mean, you feel as if... So that Gurgaon and this, I could see, at least visually. Plus, they have much better connectivity. And the biggest thing of Gachibowli is you can work and home is 2 kilometers. Wherever you work, you can get an apartment or a villa within 2 to 4 kilometers. So, so this is what I was trying to say. As you're right, it's become like an innovation district or a business district as in the US. You're right, absolutely.
Madhav, may I come in for
a minute? Yes, just wanted to say we are actually at time, but if everybody is okay, we can go over a little 10, 15 more minutes and do one more round. So we'll start with
Madhav,
Professor.
I'll take leave.
Yeah.
I have to join another call, but once again, thanks everyone. I enjoyed the discussion. Really enjoyed the discussion, but sorry, I have to leave you a little early. But thanks again. Thanks very much.
Thanks, OP. Yes, Professor.
Your question that how we can bring back the high-valued job assumes that there's a massive magnitude of out-migration of high-valued job. To some extent, yes, true, but we have to assess that because what is evident that Delhi's growth rate, NCT's growth rate has become half. It was 4% during, 91, 2001. It has become less than 2%, right? And also the employment growth, our study shows, has been very less. But the income growth of NCT is much higher than NCR. And even the master plan recognizes that excepting the Haryana part, the rest of the districts of NCR is not growing economically in terms of income, which really means that Delhi's per capita income has gone up. And that shows that not much, yes, some selective exclusion must have taken place. So that is first point. Second point, I think Shamik made a very important, comparison between the decentralization which is taking place in Europe and what is happening in India. He said that there the people go there and then you carry the industries and infrastructure. Here we take the industries and the people follow that. To what extent this hypothesis is validated by the analysis here? It is indeed true that wherever infrastructure, transport network has been provided, some industries have been given land in a vacant area, and Shamik is absolutely right that industries come and then comes the population movement. But if you look at the growth rate of population in NCR, forget about NCT, is much higher than what the region can absorb. You find unemployment rate. PLFS data has been talked about by Amit. That shows that much higher rate of unemployment, higher rate of poverty in the NCR, which really means despite the state control over the industries, there has been massive in-migration and of illiterate migration. The unemployment rate is high because the requirement of skill for the industries are not being matched by the people who are coming in. And level of infrastructure, access to basic amenities is alarmingly low in the NCR districts, excepting the NCT part, which really means that although it is true that to some extent, people follow, but much more people come in. You don't have control over the migration, and migration in the NCR has been very, very high. Amit was mentioning about the PLFS data. I looked at the PLFS data. It's not possible to build up separate estimates for NCR because the sample size and the locations issues are there. But certainly it is true that about 50% of the people in the unorganized sector lost jobs in the first 3 months. That data is available. April, May, and June in 2020, they lost jobs and they did not get salaries. That is the quality of employment in NCR. So basically, I have a feeling that we have to talk about providing infrastructural support, basic amenities in the outer periphery, if you're talking about pushing the industries into that area, because serious deficiencies of infrastructure and the quality jobs are there. Imagine in the first 3 months when our political leaders were saying, please keep your salaries, give them salaries, unorganized sector, 50% of them report absolutely no income. This is official PLFS data. So I certainly think that this is an important issue of taking infrastructural facilities in the external periphery before you talk about taking the industries. One quick point, I think Rana mentioned this, that to what extent it is because of the decision of the industries themselves or the land use restrictions. I think that's an important point. In 1996, there were restrictions which came in, and there are conscious effort to push many of the industries out. And now, as you mentioned, that in the new master plan, such provisions are there. What is being noted is that Delhi NCR is not getting those industries which are increasingly becoming energy efficient. So there is a need for that. But nonetheless, land use restrictions are not necessarily linked with the environment. They are linked with the demand of the upper and the middle class. Many of the land use restrictions are really for catering to the needs of the middle class. And that I think needs to be addressed. But there's such a strong middle class lobby in the planning in Delhi and outside regions. There's a massive subsidies being given by the Delhi government. At the time of election, all the parties talk about giving subsidies to the middle class. And that's the politics of the country. So I think land use restrictions are extremely important, but they need to be really addressed through some kind of a structural change, because it is not that easy to change it. But this is certainly very important in the context of the dispersal of industries from the center to the periphery. Thanks, Madhav.
Thanks, Professor. So we'll go to this just quick. I mean, we are about time. I think we can continue these conversations. But maybe Amit, will start with you and go around in the reverse order. Just any last comments that you have, and we can continue the conversation with.
Madhav, thanks. Just a very quick thing, like maybe the question that we are asking itself is wrong. And I'm just curiously saying that, because when we say that, is it the economic activity, high-end industries that we need to get in? Or the simple question could be that why should we not really just talk about heritage in Delhi? And when we talk about heritage, there is so much that can actually be done in terms of productivity and things. And typically, if you really look at cities across the world, 80% of the revenues will always come from local industries, and quite a lot of them, 20% will come from traded industries. So why not talk about heritage? Delhi is about heritage, and there is so much value addition that can happen there, and we have not even touched upon that. In fact, I think it was Rana or somebody who did talk about what do you call the old city, the city of jinns, as you might actually want to say, or whatever. There is so much that can actually happen around those areas. In fact, the other thing is, we have all talked about a spatial plan, and I think the inherent view that we've had is that the city has to be built for cars. I think when you talk about movement or whatever, I think why can't we really say that the city of Delhi has to be for walking or something of that sort? I think Delhi that way is horrible, the most unequal city in the world. It actually is fairly exploitative for people on foot. So maybe something of that sort. I'm just thinking, but heritage is a very important aspect. And that's the creative economy part of the story that can be looked at. Over to you, Madhav, please.
Thanks a lot. Rana?
Madhav, just to just echo what Professor Kundu was saying, I think the issue of land use, the land use policies. In fact, Dr. Sharma's also referred to that point, right? And so when we start looking at this issue of land use restrictions, it's a whole bunch of things. It's a building codes, your floor area restrictions, but it's also, do you allow mixed zoning? Or are there rigid criteria that, okay, this space is commercial, this space is residential, etc. So that one, and just to repeat my previous appeal, that this issue of how to just have better coordination between the state industrial development agencies and the key urban agencies, town planning, etc., really needs to be looked into. And some of the models that we're seeing that apparently do seem to work better, can that how might that translate for the NCR region? That's it. Over. Thank you.
Thanks. Balaji?
Yeah, thank you, Madhav. So let me quickly say, in addition to what everybody has said, I think this whole question of the nature of transaction, I'm probably sound like a broken record, between firms, organizations, cultural entities included, takes place is very crucial in order to understand how you generate economic activity and jobs and its implication, I think, for the labor market. With the labor market, there are 2 points I'd like to make. First of all, I'm a little uncomfortable about talking about this notion of high value jobs, because when you talk about high value jobs, it automatically, you're bringing into account people who do other work that is not necessarily quote unquote high value. Think of the rapid growth in the platform economy and platform services in the country. We have 5 million people working in it, which is more than the entire IT industry, right? In the major metropolitan areas. So just talk about these high value jobs. I don't think is not a very. I think we got to think about the whole spectrum of work, right? So that is one. Secondly, labor markets are not just abstract economic entities. We have to see them as socially embedded entities. That's where migration come in. Do people coming from particular parts of the country, when they work in this, what is the nature of work? That is, and the skills that they bring. So, and here it's not just at the low end, even at the high end, in the IT industry, etc. You have people with old, alumni ties, the IITs and IIMs and all. So it is embedded in a set of social relationships. And I think we need to understand that with greater clarity, which is not, there's not been enough work done on that. Then once we do that, then I think personally, I think is a lot of fetish with building, knowledge parks and those kinds of things, and the assumption that there'll be increasing returns to scale merely because you're proximate to one another. I think we'll start to, we will start to question them or sort of place them under the microscope, because you start to understand that these are really often not little more than glorified real estate ventures, right? The final point is, a couple of people mentioned the whole the idea, the importance of looking at consumers, and I completely agree. Although I would just add a small caveat to that, which is that in any large metropolitan area, what we produce is not entirely locally consumed. So those networks, in terms of global production networks, how you sort of are situated and embedded in global production networks. So because what you produce locally gets shipped out, and what is it that you actually consume, a substantial portion of it actually comes in from other parts of the country, if not from overseas. So those, figuring out where you fit in the international division of labor, in addition to overlaying that in terms of the local spatial division of labor across the suburban, exurban areas, is very critical. Let me stop here.
Thanks. Vidisha, you want some last words? You're muted, so we can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Just to echo what everyone else has been saying, and I think I will go back to my point that quality of life is extremely important, and all of things like land use restrictions are something that restricts the quality of life because of the that you cannot build affordable housing in certain areas. So all of it is really related. Culture and heritage and tourism is a great idea, and Delhi could certainly develop much more of it. It creates jobs, creates incomes. One little puzzle for me is that Delhi's quality of the income levels are fairly high. Per capita incomes are fairly high. So if jobs are moving out, how is it that the per capita income has moved up? Delhi is also supposed to be a consumption center compared to other metropolitan areas. So I think some comparative study of maybe Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore would bring out certain characteristics of Delhi itself, which can be supported with the planning recommendations that we make. So yeah, just there's a few comments. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've gone quite a bit over time, almost 20 minutes. I don't know, Abhijit, if you want to have one or two last things to say, and then we can close the session.
Thank you again. What more can I say? And but one thing I was just feeling happy all the time was about that. All the points are great speakers mentioning. We have touched them somewhere or the other in our plan. So be it the housing, be it the how to strengthen the economy, be it the tourism, be it the residential accommodations for the workers and all, rented accommodation and security and a database for making further planning. All these aspects we have touched upon in our plan, and I'll be happy if you go through that and you can give your valuable comments, and that'll be just great, because we have to plan for if I can share, the 11.3 crore population of the NCR by 2041. And at that time, we'll be 67% urbanized. That's the projections, what they say. So we have an urban area, we have various towns scattered. We want every town to be independent. We have to bring in synergy also. We have to have a relation with the peri-urban areas and the rural areas. Simultaneously, we have to conserve the greens, have the water for around, because we are water deficient. Most of the districts in NCR are water deficient, so we are dependent on water for water from outside. And all that the Renuka Dam and Kishau Dam, everything is in the papers only. And there are fights about the water. And we have excess water, the drainage issues are there. And the real estate is an issue. Some states, we are a federal system here. Even though NCR PB plans something, the states have to implement.
Just closing.
That's it. But I'm finishing with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to providing comments also to the plan. With that, I'd like to thank all of you. First, we can congratulate Dr. Samir Sharma for being appointed Chief Secretary of Andhra Pradesh. Congratulations, sir. And thank you all of you for your. We will definitely get in touch with all of you to get more feedback. I also want to say thank you to all our audience. We have about 100 people in audience listening to this conversation, and I think for us, we feel there is clear justification that we need to start looking at economic geography or this approach at studying our metropolitan regions. And I think, with that being the starting point, how best can we then use this information to be able to transform these regions into sort of these first units of economy that are able to sort of put us on that path of building a greater economy, creating more jobs, but also ensuring a good quality of life for all the residents in our cities. So with that, thank you very much. We'll be very happy to share the presentation. And of course, as we in a few months' time, once we have enough review on this material, we plan to open up these data sets that we have created so that other researchers, other academics, etc., other partners who want to work with this information can continue to work with it as well. So thank you very much, and we'll close this session and look forward to some of you participating in the rest of the sessions at Connect KARO. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.